The first 14 lessons have helped us build a very strong foundation. Through our own practice, we've been building layers of understanding. And as the workbook continues, we're going to be stepping on those experiential layers. And from that vantage point, we're going to continue to deepen into realizing our deepest nature, our deepest essence. So please gift yourself the opportunity to go one step at a time. The practice is what creates those layers of understanding. It's not reading or intellectualizing or believing anything. It's through direct seeing of our inner workings of how we have constructed this entire experience, which is a beautiful realization, but it goes one step at a time. So, with that background, lesson 15 says, "My thoughts are images that I have made." In other words, that greater field of awareness that we are doesn't just have attributes like we've been covering in the last few lessons. Attributes like kindness and love and compassion and joy and freedom and peace and presence and relaxation. All of those are attributes of that deeper essence. But in addition to those attributes, that deeper essence also has capacities. One of the capacities is the experience of images that appear in our mental emotional field. So today's entire practice is to help us have that direct experience for ourselves to witness the innate capacity that our mind has to create these images. And the reason why this is important is because not only are we going to become aware that we have the capacity to create images, but once we have space to see that image, we start to create distance from identification with that image, and we're going to start seeing for ourselves that we confuse our deepest essence with the images. So that may sound convoluted, but this is why we're going to be practicing realizing that we have a capacity to create images. In my own journey inward, I've had several moments where today's truth has become very obvious. So I'm going to offer a few examples of how this has been very clear to me, and I'm also going to suggest very practical ways for you to see it for yourself. So one of the times that today's truth became very obvious to me was in my first 2-month silent meditation retreat. So we're every day going inward, tapping into that deepest essence and resting there and becoming aware of any thoughts or feelings that show up in our mental emotional field. The experience itself is a little bit difficult to put into words, but it's actually very simple. So I was resting in presence, in awareness, and I saw the birth of an idea, of a thought. It was like seeing a burst of light that had almost like an imprint of an image. It was like a burst of energy that had this imprint that I can see as an image in my mind. And it was so clear because I was in such a state of meditation that it was very evident that an image arises in the mental emotional field. And also what happens is that if I become interested in that image, I almost go inside of like this movie. And so we see this a lot in silent meditation retreats, and I have spent a lot of time in these settings. So that's one example. But another time that this happened, and it was very obvious, was after a 4-day, 4-night moon dance ceremony in Mount Shasta. This was a few years ago. And after being sleepless for 4 nights, on the 5th day, I start driving to Seattle. And after an hour of being in the car, I recognize that if I am not absolutely present with the road, any single memory of the event or any memory of my family or any thought at all would open like a portal that if I attended to it, I would go into dreamland. And it was very dangerous, obviously. So I looked for a hotel and I rested for the rest of the day. And I started to drive back to Seattle the next day. But you don't have to put yourself in a sleep deprivation setting to see this. But I do recommend, if you have a chance to go to a silent meditation retreat, please gift yourself that opportunity, because there's so much richness to seeing all of this very clearly. But those are just 2 examples of this idea becoming very crisp and very self-evident in my experience. Now, to make this very simple and practical, I want to offer you to consider thinking of a situation or an event or a dinner that you would want to plan out with someone that you care about, perhaps next weekend or in the near future. So even just the invitation for you to have that experience, you can potentially start to notice images in your mind of where that might take place. What might you wear? Who would you have this experience with? You start to have images that arise in your own mental emotional field. You could even draw it if you are an artist. You can draw it because it's so evident that we see images. And that is what today's lesson is inviting us to recognize and see clearly. And there is a reason for that. This is one of those lessons that I feel will make a lot of sense to reread it once we've had that experience. Because once we see for ourselves that we have the capacity to see images arise in the mental emotional field, then we can start to tie in some of the earlier concepts that we practice with. So when we start tying that we have the capacity to create images with meaning making, then we start to have a conceptual understanding that can shine light as to the human distress, the difficulties that we experience are very much related to an identification or a misidentification, because we identify with the images that arise, and then we also identify with the meaning that we make to those images. And through that process, we start creating a self-identity that is separate from our deepest nature, that is separate from a greater understanding of who we are, that is separate from our connectedness with the whole. And these are words that I'm expressing to you to point to an experience that every single one of us has to have on our own. But the experience itself will come from this intimacy with our capacity to see images in our mental emotional field, and our capacity to start recognizing we're the one making meaning, perhaps based on past conditions or understanding that's lacking, deeper wisdom or deeper understanding, we start to believe a self-image that is limited by the conditions of the past. So this starts to tie in different ideas, different experiences, different practices that we've been building upon. And each one of us has to start to see this for ourselves so that we can start to gain clarity on this whole confusion that every one of us has when we have forgotten our deepest essence, and then we have identified to a self-image that is basically limited by the understanding that we may have had at any given time. Now, before concluding today's lesson, I also want to acknowledge that second and third paragraph on today's lesson, because it's not something that I hear a lot, but I do want to normalize if anyone else has had the experience of light episodes. I just want to say that when I first had my spiritual awakening or spiritual opening, a few months later, I started to see these flashes of light around my forehead area. And they didn't last very long. They were just like bursts of light. And at first, they scared me, and I was asking other people if anyone knew what that was. No one seemed to know what that was. About 5 months after they started, they went away on their own. And I'm sharing this because throughout my journey, I haven't heard very many people talk about these light episodes, but I did go to a 10-day silent meditation retreat with a teacher called Essen Cuenca. And if you happen to train with Cuenca, you will hear him say that on his third day of his first Vipassana retreat, he saw these flashes of light, and that gave him inspiration to stay because he actually wanted to run away on the second day. So I am sharing this to say that I've heard it from other people, but not from very many people. So if it has happened to you, I just want to normalize it. It happened to me too. It was way before the Course in Miracles. It's not necessarily related to the Course. As I just shared, a Buddhist teacher also experienced these flashes of light, which supported him to stay through a 10-day mindfulness retreat. But if you haven't experienced these flashes, I also want to normalize that I know a lot of people that are very deep in their practice and have never seen a single light. So I just want to normalize it either way and acknowledge, because I did have that experience and I just didn't know what to do with it. So I actually agree with what this last line in the third paragraph is saying. These exercises will not be revealing knowledge to you, but they will be preparing the way for it. So I truly believe that none of these one-off experiences really mean anything. So don't dwell if you have experiences like that or things that you can't explain necessarily. Like, don't dwell on it. They go away. If you need to understand it, you will. But these exercises are definitely preparing the path, are preparing the conditions for the awareness to dawn on your own mind through your own practice. So it is a path that needs to be practiced, and as everything with practice and awareness continues to grow in any field. So this is one of those examples. So having said that, thank you so much for your practice, for being here, and I will see you next time for lesson 16. Thank you.